Your soulmate secretly put a property in your name. Why this address changes everything. My beloved child. Somewhere behind the silence you have been trying to understand, your soulmate made a decision so serious that even the people closest to them were never supposed to know about it. They quietly put a property in your name. But that is not the part that changes everything. It is the address written on those papers. The moment you understand why they chose that exact place, certain pieces of your story may suddenly fit together in a way you never expected. Because this was not a random investment. It was not simply a gift. And according to what happened before those documents were signed, your soulmate had been thinking about this address far longer than anyone realized. They visited it more than once. Alone. They stood outside without going in, almost as if they were waiting for the courage to make something permanent. Then one day, they finally did. And when someone asked why your name belonged on the paperwork, their answer was only 6 words: they'll understand when they see it. That sentence matters, because your soulmate could have chosen another property. Something newer. Something easier. Something with no emotional history attached to it. Instead, they chose a place connected to a memory they never completely told you about. There was one detail they remembered from an old conversation with you, a small detail you probably assumed they had forgotten. Maybe you spoke about the kind of place where you could finally feel settled. Maybe you mentioned a neighborhood, a view, a street, or even the feeling you wanted when you opened your front door someday. Whatever it was, they carried those words much longer than you knew. Don't skip, because this is where their secret decision becomes deeply personal. Before signing anything, they reportedly asked one unusual question: could ownership be arranged so that your name would be protected even if circumstances between the two of you changed? Think about that. They were not only imagining being beside you. They were thinking about what would remain yours even if life became complicated. But there was still one thing they refused to explain. Why this particular address seemed to affect them so strongly. And then came the clue nobody expected. Hidden among the ordinary details connected to the property was something your soulmate recognized immediately: the street number. It matched a date they had privately associated with you for years. That alone might sound like coincidence, except there was more. The property sat only a short distance from a place where your soulmate once made a promise to themselves about you. A promise they never told you existed. On that day, they believed they had lost their chance. They apparently stood there thinking that if life ever gave them another opportunity, they would stop treating their feelings like something temporary. Years later, when this property became available, the address brought that memory rushing back. Suddenly, putting your name on it was no longer about real estate. It became their way of answering an unfinished moment from the past. Stay till the end, because there is something huge waiting for you. Your name on those papers is only the beginning. What your soulmate planned to place inside that property, and the message they intended you to find there, reveals what they were actually preparing for. What they planned to leave inside that property was never meant to look expensive or impressive, it was meant to make you stop the moment you saw it. Your soulmate had chosen one particular room before anything else was finished, and inside it, they intended to place a sealed envelope with your name handwritten across the front. Not a legal document. Not another property paper. A personal message explaining why they had carried this plan in silence for so long. But here is where the mystery deepens. Before that envelope was placed there, someone close to your soulmate discovered what they were doing and confronted them. They asked the obvious question: why would you put something this important in their name without telling them? Your soulmate went quiet. Then they gave an answer nobody expected. They said telling you too early might make you believe the property was supposed to convince you of something. They did not want that. They wanted you to know that the decision had been made before they knew what you would choose. That changes the meaning of everything, because this was not supposed to be a bargaining chip for your love. Your soulmate apparently wanted the property to stand on its own, a quiet acknowledgement of something they believed you deserved regardless of what happened between you. And there was another detail. During the paperwork process, they kept returning to the spelling of your name, checking it more carefully than necessary, as though seeing it connected to that address made the entire idea suddenly real. Yet the person helping them noticed something strange. Your soulmate carried an old folded piece of paper with them whenever they visited the property. They never handed it over. They never explained it. They simply kept it close. Don't skip, because that paper connects the address to the promise they made years ago. Written on it was a short list of things they once hoped to give you someday, not possessions, but experiences, somewhere peaceful to return to, a table where difficult conversations could end gently, and a door you would never have to wonder whether you were welcome to open. But one line at the bottom was different from everything above it. It had been written later, in darker ink, after the two of you had apparently gone through a period of distance or uncertainty. It said, "If I ever get another chance, make it real." That was why the address affected them. That was why they kept visiting. And that was why your name appeared where almost everyone expected theirs to be. Your soulmate was turning an old private promise into something tangible without demanding anything from you in return. Still, one question remained unanswered. Why had they not given you the envelope yet? The answer came when someone noticed that your soulmate had written a specific date on the back of it, a date that had not arrived when the property was arranged. They were waiting for that day before revealing everything. But just beneath the date were 3 words that made the person who discovered them look twice, after they remember. And what your soulmate believes you are about to remember could explain why this address was chosen in the first place. Those 3 words, after they remember, were not referring to some dramatic secret you had deliberately forgotten. They pointed to something much smaller, which is exactly why it carried so much weight. Years earlier, there had been an ordinary moment between you and your soulmate when you passed through that area and briefly stopped near the same street. You may not have thought anything of it afterward. But your soulmate did. You looked toward one particular property and said something simple about how peaceful it seemed, how strange it was that a place could feel familiar even when it was not yours. Your soulmate never responded the way they wanted to. They just watched you, quietly storing the moment away. Later, when life pulled the two of you into uncertainty, that memory became strangely important to them. They began wondering whether you had felt something that day too. And when the same address unexpectedly appeared in front of them again years later, they could not ignore it. But there was one problem. The property was not exactly as your soulmate remembered it. Something had changed, and when they walked inside for the first serious viewing, they noticed it immediately. A wall had been removed, the entrance looked different, and the rooms had been updated. But one feature remained untouched. Near the back was a window overlooking the exact spot where you had once stood. Your soulmate reportedly froze when they saw it. Suddenly, they were looking at that old memory from the opposite side. From inside the place you had once admired. That was the moment their plan shifted. Until then, they had considered buying the property under their own name and telling you later. Instead, they asked whether the documents could be prepared differently. Your name would appear where theirs had been expected. Stay till the end, because even that decision was hiding another layer. Your soulmate did not simply want to give you somewhere to live. They wanted to answer something you had said during that forgotten conversation. And what you said was not about money. It was about belonging. You had quietly wondered what it would feel like to have one place in life that could not suddenly disappear because somebody else changed their mind. Your soulmate remembered the emotion behind those words even after the exact conversation faded from everyone else's memory. That is why they became so careful about making the property genuinely yours. But then, just before everything was supposed to be revealed, something happened that nearly stopped the entire plan. Your soulmate received information about the history of the property. Information involving its previous owner and a document that had apparently remained there long before either of you knew the place might become important. At first, they assumed it had nothing to do with you. Then they saw a familiar name written inside. Not your full name, but a name connected to a story you once told them. And suddenly, the address was no longer meaningful only because of your shared memory. Your soulmate realized this property may have crossed the path of your life before either of you ever stood outside it together. The familiar name belonged to someone from a story you had mentioned only once, so casually that your soulmate almost questioned their own memory. It appeared on an old maintenance record tucked among papers left behind by the previous owner. There was no dramatic inheritance waiting to be uncovered, no impossible coincidence that could explain everything instantly. But there was enough to make your soulmate curious. The name was connected to someone who had once worked nearby and whom you had described as important to an earlier chapter of your life. Your soulmate began asking careful questions about the property's history, and one answer immediately caught their attention. Years before the two of you ever stopped on that street together, the property had briefly been used as a gathering place where people from the surrounding community would meet. That meant the place you once described as strangely familiar might actually have existed somewhere in the background of a story you had heard long before you consciously remembered the address. Your soulmate could have dismissed it there. Instead, they returned to the property and examined the old papers again, trying to separate meaningful facts from coincidence. That is when they discovered a handwritten note attached to one of the records. It contained no secret fortune and no mysterious prediction. Just an observation about the house: people always come back to the places where they felt safe. Those words hit your soulmate harder than expected. They remembered what you had said about wanting somewhere that could not be taken away simply because another person changed their mind. Suddenly, their decision felt less like an extravagant surprise and more like a response to something vulnerable you had once revealed. Don't skip. Because this was the moment your soulmate changed one final detail in the plan. They contacted the person handling the documents and asked a question they had been avoiding: if your name was going to be connected to this property, How could they make absolutely certain you understood there were no hidden expectations attached? The answer led them back to the sealed envelope. Your soulmate rewrote the letter inside from beginning to end. They removed every sentence that sounded like a request for another chance. They crossed out anything that might make you feel responsible for their feelings. And then they added one paragraph that explained the real reason behind the address. They wrote that they remembered the day you stood outside this place, but they also remembered something more important, the expression on your face when you spoke about belonging somewhere without fear. Your soulmate wanted the property to represent security before romance, choice before obligation. Yet they still had not finished. At the bottom of the rewritten letter, they added instructions telling you to look in one specific place inside the house after reading it. Not a safe. Not a locked drawer. A small section beside that back window where your old memory began. Something had been placed there deliberately, something connected to the date written on the envelope. And once you understand what it is, you will finally know why your soulmate believed this property could change not only where your future happens, but what happens between the two of you next. Beside that back window, your soulmate had placed something so ordinary that anyone else might have walked straight past it, a small wooden box with no lock, no decoration, and only your initials marked underneath. Inside were 3 objects. The first was an old photograph of the street taken around the time you had originally passed through that neighborhood together. The second was a copy of the property document showing your name beside the address. But the third object was the one they knew would make you understand. It was a key attached to a handwritten tag containing the same date from the back of the envelope. And beneath that date, your soulmate had written, "This is when I stopped waiting for the perfect moment." That date was not the day they purchased the property. It was the day they finally admitted to themselves that loving you quietly was no longer enough. Yet there was another side to that date, one you had never been told. On that same day, your soulmate had nearly contacted you. They wrote a message, erased it, rewrote it, then left their phone untouched for hours. Something had frightened them. Not rejection exactly, but the possibility that returning to your life with nothing except emotional promises would reopen wounds instead of healing them. So they made themselves a private rule: if they ever approached you again, they would come with clarity, not pressure. With something real, not another beautiful sentence they might fail to live up to. That is when the property became part of the plan. And here is what makes the key so important. It was not presented as the key to our home. Your soulmate deliberately refused to write those words. The tag said, "Your door. Your decision." They wanted you to enter without feeling that accepting the property meant accepting them. But someone close to your soulmate asked the question they had been avoiding: what happens if they walk through that door and still don't choose you? Your soulmate apparently looked toward that same back window before answering. Then they said something unexpectedly calm. "Then at least they'll know I finally meant what I said." That was the real risk behind everything. They had placed something valuable in your name without knowing whether the gesture would bring you closer or become the final thing they ever gave you. Stay till the end, because the story was still not finished. Before leaving the box there, your soulmate added one more item beneath the photograph, something they had originally decided to keep forever. It was a second key, older than the first, with scratches along its edge and a faded label attached to it. When the person helping them saw that label, they immediately asked why a key from another address belonged inside your property. Your soulmate hesitated before answering, because that old key came from the place where they made their biggest mistake with you. And what happened behind that door explains why they were willing to put this new one entirely in your name. That older key belonged to a place your soulmate once believed would become part of their future, but it became the setting for the decision they regretted most. During the period when distance grew between you, they went there believing they needed to choose certainty over emotion. They told themselves they could build a comfortable life without confronting what they truly felt for you. But on the final night they held that key, something happened. They found an old message from you. Nothing dramatic, just a few sincere words you had sent when you still believed the connection between you was worth protecting. Your soulmate read it more than once in that empty room. And suddenly, the life they were trying to force themselves into felt completely wrong. They realized the mistake was never simply losing you. It was allowing fear to make decisions that honesty should have made. They kept that key afterward as a reminder of the door they had chosen when they should have chosen courage. That is why they placed the old key beside the new one. One represented the life they entered while running from their feelings. The other represented something completely different, a future where you would never be trapped by their choices. But there was still one final document your soulmate had kept separate from everything else. It was not hidden inside the wooden box. It remained with the person handling the property, along with strict instructions that you should receive it only after you had seen the house yourself. Don't skip, because this document reveals why your soulmate refused to make the property surprise about winning you back. Written into their instructions was a clear boundary: you were to be given time to understand everything without them standing beside you, watching your reaction or asking for an answer. They even planned to stay away on the day you received the key. For perhaps the first time, they were willing to let their actions speak without immediately asking what those actions earned them. But then the person handling everything noticed something unusual about that final document. At the bottom, beneath the practical instructions, your soulmate had added a handwritten sentence that technically did not need to be there. It read, "If they ask why this address, give them the last envelope." There was another envelope. One nobody had mentioned. Your soulmate had sealed it separately because it contained the one truth they were still afraid to place directly in your hands. Inside was the complete story of the first time they returned to this street alone after losing contact with you, and what they discovered when they arrived. Someone else was standing outside the property that day, asking questions about whether it might ever become available. Your soulmate initially thought nothing of it. Then that stranger mentioned you. Not by accident. Not as part of some impossible mystery. They had heard your name connected to the neighborhood before. And when your soulmate asked how, the stranger gave an answer that made them realize your connection to this address began much earlier than either of you understood. The stranger's answer was surprisingly simple, but it changed the way your soulmate understood the entire story. Years earlier, someone connected to you had spoken about this neighborhood as a place where a person could begin again. Your name had come up during one of those conversations, not because anyone knew you would someday stand outside this exact property, but because the hopes attached to your future sounded remarkably similar to what you later told your soulmate yourself. A peaceful place. A door that felt secure. Somewhere you could build.